Before I start this episode about Sega games on the Atari 2600, you might be thinking, oh, here we go, another gaming YouTuber who's going to talk about the video game crash of '83 and how they buried a load of ET cartridges in the desert. But I'm not going to do that because I'm British and we didn't have a video game crash, so big up the Power Regions for winning once again. The Atari 2600 is a very special machine that basically laid the groundwork for the modern video game console. While it wasn't the first and definitely had its fair share of competition, its enormous popularity made it the first household name of games consoles, and helped normalise the industry of selling hardware and software separately. The console itself is the gateway to getting an audience into your infrastructure, so you can sell them loads of games, and prior to the 2600, this wasn't the norm. The first generation of home video game consoles was largely made up of plug-and-play Pong machines, and all the software was included on the system itself. Occasionally, some systems would come with interchangeable cartridges, but these were often bridging different connections on the hardware itself to access different games that were already built into the machine. This obviously contrasts with the 2600, which offered its software on cartridges that contained a dedicated ROM chip that housed the specific software. This also birthed the existence of third-party software publishers for video games, as game developers were no longer required to also develop the hardware their software needed to play on, as had been the case with arcade games and the aforementioned Pong consoles. So now we have companies like Activision and Imagic making their own games on their own cartridges that may look aesthetically different to Atari's cartridges, but they're compatible with the 2600. Sega would also get in on this action in the early 80s. At the time, Sega's American arcade division came into existence when Sega purchased Gremlin Industries, and it's these Gremlin Sega games that were ported to the Atari 2600. While this arrangement would continue for a while in Western markets, Sega would eventually shift to first-party developer in the late 80s with the success of the Master System and the Mega Drive. This would also mean third-party Sega releases to other platforms would slow down, as Sega used their games to bolster its own console libraries. So let's take a look at a handful of Sega games released prior to Sega's shift to first party and see what the American branch of the company was doing for the 2600 in the early 80s. Now first of all, let me gauge your expectations. The Atari 2600 is a system largely born out of the arcade boom of the late 70s, and as a result a large portion of its library is made up of arcade ports. These also suit the hardware well because ROM sizes are ridiculously small, even when compared to the 8-bit machines that followed it in the next console generation. As a result, the games are often very simplistic, with an easy-to-learn gameplay loop that isn't a million miles away from the limitations of an LCD game. Some software would break the mould, but 9 times out of 10 you're playing a very simple little arcade game with an addictive gameplay loop that keeps you coming back for more. It might feel a tad repetitive or mindless by today's standards, but the sign of a good 2600 game is one that keeps you gripped because the gameplay loop is so engaging. Case in point, 1980's Carnival. This is a simple little gallery shooter where you have limited ammunition to shoot all the targets and a spinning wheel. You can gain extra ammunition from the 8 symbols that also move across the screen, and in the top left there are bonus items that can also increase your ammo and score when shot. The game is a test of aim and speed, as you want to gain every ammo bonus you can, but also not waste your shots on missed targets or items that take away score or ammo. Those can appear in the top left as well. Occasionally, the yellow birds will also fly to the bottom of the screen, and those need to be shot quickly or they'll take away some of your ammo. This is a fast and frantic little game that rewards accurate aiming and careful use of ammo power-ups, because if you get more ammo with a full clip, then you're essentially wasting those power-ups. It might not look like much, but honestly, this can really get its claws into you. (1982's Buck Rogers' Planet of Zoom makes for an impressive 2600 port because it's a game that offers more than one screen of action. The game is split into a low-flying section where you have to navigate through multiple gates before you can then take off into outer space, where you then have to shoot down waves of enemies before taking on a larger boss. It's genuinely impressive that the 2600 can tackle games with multiple stages and playstyles, and as a result there's a bit more game to sink your teeth into here. You can also speed up and slow down by pushing the joystick up or down, and this is crucial to succeeding in the space sections where you have to take down multiple waves of enemies. Slowing down lets you shoot more enemies in one swoop, while playing at a higher top speed often means that you're more likely to fly into enemies. It's still a simple space shooter at heart, but the third-person view and the combination of quick manoeuvring and shooting makes this feel like a dry run for games like Space Harrier and Afterburner. Pengo is a 1982 puzzle game where you have to push ice blocks around the stages in order to crush the enemy's snow bees before they can get you. The arcade version is famous for featuring the classic Gershon Kingsley song Popcorn, and as a result I think it's one of the more memorable early Sega arcade games. Sadly, this 2600 port does suffer a bit in the journey from arcade to home. The maps are much smaller and therefore don't have the same urgency as the arcade version, which feels like a lot more is happening at any given time. The background music has also been changed to a much more repetitive little tune that gets irritating quite quickly. The 3 diamond blocks have thankfully made it into this port, and if you connect those in either a horizontal or vertical orientation, you can stun all the snow bees on screen and get yourself a hefty point bonus as a result. This version is still recognisably Pengo, and it's still a good bit of arcade fun, but the smaller maps don't create the same sort of anarchic lunacy that the arcade version offers, so it feels a little subdued as a result. (1983's) Thunderground is an interesting one because despite the change in title, it's actually a scaled down port of 1981's Borderline. You no longer have to contend with the vertically scrolling shooter stages, and instead only play in the fixed screen areas where you tunnel through the environment to reach the nuclear bases at the top, which then have to be shot and destroyed to complete the stages. There are 2 enemy tanks defending the bases, so you have to be careful to either avoid them by hiding in the dirt, or destroy them before they become a problem. Digging through the environment can also uncover power-ups, so it's worth exploring early on before you tackle the nuclear bases. The stages tend to get more devious as they progress. Some stages make you destroy the bases in a specific order, and some stages even remove all of the dirt, making you completely open to enemy fire. While Pengo felt a little hard done by in its 2600 port, Thunderground does a lot within its limitations and manages to offer up another surprising and engaging little gameplay loop to get hooked into. Now before we get into this final game, I have to throw up a flashing images warning. If you suffer from photosensitive epilepsy, then the following footage may be harmful to you. Games of this vintage are notorious for this sort of thing, but this next game is a particularly egregious example, so please switch off now if you are susceptible to this. So here we have 1982's TACScan, which was originally rendered with vector graphics. The big gimmick with TACScan is that you start off controlling a wave of 5 ships, which allows you to use some really impressive firepower, but if you take a hit, you lose that ship, and you get progressively weaker. In between stages, you can gain ships back by docking them into position, and then it's off to do the same thing again at increasing speeds. This 2600 port completely removes 2 other modes of play from the arcade version, which unfortunately makes it a very repetitive little game that doesn't offer a whole lot to do in its gameplay loop. It also contains a particularly aggressive screen flash every time you shoot down an enemy, which seems unnecessary when the main thing that you're doing in TACScan is shooting down enemies. This is unfortunately a bit of a weak one to end on, but I think TACScan is a great example of how the shorter gameplay loops can be a detriment to certain 2600 games if the action isn't varied and engaging enough. And that's your lot for another Sega Driven video. Thanks as always to our generous patrons who have financially supported the creation of this video. If you'd like to join them and get early access to new work and exclusive monthly Q&A videos, then head on over to patreon.com/SegaDriven and consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.